What would you do if, in the middle of a live television broadcast watched by millions, a world-famous celebrity demanded something that no one, not even the host, could have anticipated? Imagine the cameras rolling, the studio lights blazing, and a crowd of eager fans cheering, all while the person in the spotlight expects you to bow, to curtsy, to acknowledge their status in a way that defies all norms. This wasn't some scripted sketch or a playful comedy bit. This was real. And the host facing this challenge was Jimmy Fallon, one of the most beloved late-night personalities in America. Known for his humor, charm, and affable persona, Fallon had encountered countless celebrities, awkward moments, and unpredictable live television moments. But nothing could have prepared him for Meghan Markle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the moment Meghan Markle first stepped into the limelight, she has been a figure of fascination, admiration, and controversy. From her Hollywood days to her royal marriage and eventual exit from royal duties, Meghan has navigated fame in a way that few could. Her public image is a complicated tapestry of glamour, calculated appearances, and moments that leave the world guessing about her next move. And this appearance on Jimmy Fallon's show was supposed to be just another notch on her career, a chance to charm the American audience, promote her latest endeavors, and perhaps soften her image in the eyes of critics. But as the cameras rolled and the introduction wrapped, something unprecedented occurred. It began with a subtle tension in the air, almost imperceptible to the audience, but palpable to the crew and Fallon himself. Imagine the scene. The band plays, the applause roars, the teleprompters blink, and Meghan glides onto the stage, radiant, poised, and yet there's an unmistakable sharpness in her gaze. Jimmy, ever the professional, greets her warmly, extending his hand, offering a smile. And then, in a moment that would be replayed endlessly across social media, she made the demand, a demand that stunned everyone in the studio. She asked Jimmy Fallon to curtsy to her. Yes, you read that correctly. Curtsy. On live television. No prior arrangement. No scripted moment. Just a command delivered with a confidence that left Jimmy momentarily speechless. Let's pause for a moment and consider the audacity of that request. On one hand, Meghan's royal experience gives her a familiarity with certain forms of etiquette that many of us might find old-fashioned or ceremonial. But in the context of an American late-night talk show, a curtsy is not just unusual, it's entirely out of place. It challenges the conventions of the show, the expected interaction between host and guest, and, importantly, it puts the host on the spot in front of millions of viewers. This is not merely a minor faux pas or a harmless joke. This is a moment that could shift public perception in an instant, a high-stakes gambit that tests the composure, wit, and professionalism of the host. And for Jimmy Fallon, known for keeping the mood light and humorous, this was uncharted territory. Behind the scenes, the tension was electric. The production team, accustomed to rehearsed comedy bits and carefully timed interviews, found themselves scrambling. Security exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Stagehands paused mid-step, sensing that this was no ordinary celebrity request. Jimmy, for his part, had to make a split-second decision. How do you maintain the integrity of your show while respecting a guest whose presence commands attention, yet whose behavior now defies expectation? It's a delicate balancing act, one that could either result in a comedic goldmine or a public relations nightmare. Now, let's talk about Meghan Markle's strategy in moments like this. She is no stranger to commanding attention, to making moments feel like they are larger than life. Every appearance, every word, every subtle gesture is calculated, often leaving audiences and critics alike to wonder, is this authentic, or is this performance? And yet, even those familiar with her style were caught off guard by this particular demand. To ask a world-famous comedian and host to curtsy is not just bold, it's unprecedented. It's audacious, and it raises questions about power dynamics, celebrity influence, and the nature of respect in public spaces. In a way, this moment was a microcosm of Meghan's larger narrative. Unpredictable, headline-grabbing, and impossible to ignore. Audience members in the studio were caught between amusement, confusion, and anticipation. Some were unsure whether this was a joke. Others realized immediately that this was serious, that the usual rules of celebrity interaction had been suspended. And as the cameras continued to roll, every second stretched longer, every blink magnified, every pause pregnant with tension. Imagine sitting in that audience. You came to see a fun, lighthearted interview, to watch Jimmy Fallon crack jokes and make a star feel at home. Instead, you found yourself witnessing something entirely different, something almost uncomfortable in its intensity, yet fascinating in its unpredictability. You are leaning forward, almost holding your breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. What made this even more compelling, and what makes this story so captivating to audiences today, is the contrast between expectation and reality. Jimmy Fallon is the quintessential American host, jovial, charming, and quick-witted. He thrives on laughter, on creating moments that feel spontaneous yet polished. Meghan Markle, by contrast, is often portrayed as controlled, deliberate, and strategic in her public appearances. The clash of these personalities, amplified by the medium of live television, created a combustible scenario. And while some might dismiss it as mere celebrity drama, there's a deeper fascination here. The tension between power and etiquette, between improvisation and command, between charm and audacity. It's a story that speaks to human curiosity about behavior, authority, and the unpredictable consequences when expectations collide. Of course, the demand itself was only the beginning. How Jimmy responded, how Meghan reacted, how the crew and audience absorbed the tension. All of these elements contributed to a moment that would soon explode across social media, dominate headlines, and spark debates about celebrity behavior, television etiquette, and respect in public life. Every nuance, every gesture, every micro-expression became fodder for analysis. People debated for hours. Was this a power play? Was it an innocent mistake? Was Fallon right to resist, or should he have complied? These questions, unanswered at the time, created the perfect storm of curiosity, speculation, and drama, a perfect hook for a story that we are now about to unravel in full detail. As we delve deeper into this incident, it's important to remember that the story is more than just a confrontation. It's a window into the mechanics of live television, the pressures of celebrity culture, and the unexpected ways in which human behavior can manifest under scrutiny. The live broadcast amplifies everything. The audience sees every hesitation, every flicker of emotion, every unplanned response. And in this case, the broadcast captured not just a disagreement, but a clash of personalities and expectations that no one could have scripted. It is in these unplanned, unscripted moments that the most gripping stories are born, the ones that audiences remember, talk about, and dissect for years. But what makes this story particularly unforgettable is what came next. Because even after the initial demand, even after the brief moment of stunned silence, the narrative was far from over. The tension escalated. The reactions intensified. The consequences, both immediate and long-term, began to unfold in ways that no one could have anticipated. And as we explore each chapter of this saga, from the backstage chaos to the public fallout, from the media frenzy to the insider revelations, you will see that this is not just a story about a curtsy. It's a story about power, perception, and the unpredictable drama of human interaction under the spotlight. So, as we begin this journey into one of the most shocking and talked about moments in recent television history, ask yourself, what would you do if you were Jimmy Fallon? How would you respond if a guest demanded the impossible right in front of millions of viewers? And most importantly, the night of the show began like any other. Backstage at NBC Studios, the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the low chatter of crew members, camera operators adjusting their lenses, and producers scribbling last-minute notes on cue cards. Jimmy Fallon walked through the narrow corridor leading to the stage, hands tucked casually in his pockets, rehearsing the opening jokes in his mind. To an outsider, it might have seemed like any ordinary night on late-night television. But anyone who has spent even a single hour behind the scenes knows that the calm moments before showtime are deceiving. They are charged with anticipation, a volatile mix of excitement and tension, each second stretching longer than it seems. The staff knew that tonight's episode was unusual. Meghan Markle, the former Duchess of Sussex, was set to appear, and though she had been on talk shows before, there was an undeniable unpredictability to her public persona. Her appearances had a way of drawing attention, headlines, and often controversy. The producers whispered nervously about what might happen. Some compared it to walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. You never quite knew where the danger might strike. The costume department fussed over her wardrobe, ensuring every detail was perfect, from the subtle shine of her shoes to the fabric drape of her jacket. Makeup artists adjusted brushes and powders, whispering final words of encouragement. "You've got this, just be yourself." Jimmy, though, had to manage more than just his own nerves. As the host, he had to anticipate the unexpected. A late-night audience expects entertainment, charm, and laughter. They do not expect tension, unease, or confrontations that could shift the tone from playful to shocking in a heartbeat. Fallon's role was to maintain a balance between controlled improvisation and professional composure. But the weight of Meghan Markle's reputation, her royal background, her Hollywood experience, her ability to command attention, added an extra layer of pressure. As the audience began filing in, excitement buzzed in the air. Cameras rolled, lights focused, and Jimmy ran through his final mental checklist. Every joke, every pause, every facial expression mattered tonight. Even a fraction of hesitation could be magnified under the studio lights. He could hear the faint murmurs from the crowd outside, the rustle of programs, the shuffling of chairs. Every heartbeat felt amplified. Then, quietly, the moment arrived. The stagehands signaled that Meghan would be entering soon. Jimmy adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, and rehearsed a few casual greetings. The crew went silent, each member holding their breath, instinctively aware that the next few minutes would set the tone for the entire show. Meghan's name was announced, and the applause began, first a ripple, then a swell of excitement. Jimmy positioned himself at the center of the stage, ready to greet her with his trademark smile and handshake. When Meghan Markle entered, she moved with a confident elegance that immediately drew attention. Her poise was flawless, every step measured, every glance deliberate. It was clear she was used to commanding rooms, commanding cameras, and commanding attention. But there was something subtle in her demeanor that set the stage for what was to come. A quiet intensity, a careful control, and an unmistakable air of expectation. The kind of energy that makes everyone around her lean forward, wondering what she will do next. Jimmy extended his hand, offering a warm, professional greeting. The audience clapped politely, unaware of the tension brewing backstage. But Meghan's attention was fixed, and her expression, though pleasant, hinted at something more. As they exchanged pleasantries, Fallon sensed a shift, a subtle change in tone, an underlying firmness that suggested this appearance would be unlike any other. The crew watched, silent but alert. Camera operators adjusted angles, anticipating the need for reaction shots. Producers whispered quietly into their headsets, trying to gauge whether this would be a smooth interview or a precarious situation about to unfold. Even the band members, who were usually focused on cues and transitions, felt the shift in the energy. Something in Meghan's presence suggested that she had a purpose beyond mere conversation, a plan that was not fully visible but unmistakably there. And then it happened. Meghan Markle made her request. At first, it seemed almost absurd. Perhaps a joke, a playful tease, something meant to be laughed off. But as her words settled in, the room froze. She asked Jimmy Fallon to curtsy. On live television, no warning, no script, no precedent. Just a direct demand, delivered with the confidence of someone accustomed to having their wishes obeyed. The effect was immediate. Jimmy's smile faltered, his mind racing. The crew exchanged nervous glances. The audience, sensing something unusual, leaned forward, curious and confused. A live television moment had transformed in an instant from casual banter to high-stakes tension. Every eye in the room followed Jimmy's reaction. How he responded would determine the tone for the rest of the show, and possibly the narrative for weeks to come. Jimmy's internal dialogue was a storm of possibilities. Could he play along humorously without appearing weak? Could he refuse politely without offending one of the most powerful celebrities in the world? Should he ignore the request or address it directly? Every option carried risk. One misstep could generate ridicule. Another could generate headlines questioning his professionalism. The stakes were enormous, and there was no room for hesitation. Backstage, the team scrambled subtly. Security stayed close, prepared for any escalation, while producers debated in hushed tones whether to intervene. Stagehands paused mid-step, holding props and adjusting lights, acutely aware that even a minor miscue could become a defining moment of the broadcast. The tension was so thick it could have been sliced with a knife. And yet, amid the chaos, Fallon maintained his composure, just barely. A comedian's instinct is to find humor even in the most stressful situations, to turn tension into laughter. But this was no ordinary comedic scenario. This was a test of character, poise, and the delicate art of negotiation under the glare of public scrutiny. Every second felt stretched, as if time itself had slowed in anticipation of what would come next. The audience watched, unaware of the intricate web of backstage maneuvers, the silent exchanges of anxious glances, the rapid-fire mental calculations happening in the minds of those on stage. All they saw was a poised Meghan Markle standing before Jimmy Fallon, and a split-second pause that seemed loaded with meaning. And in that pause, the story teetered on the edge of an unforgettable live television moment. What would Fallon do? Would he comply, risking his reputation and the perception of his authority on his own show? Or would he stand firm, challenging one of the most watched figures in recent history? The moment held infinite possibilities, and the tension was unbearable. Every movement, every microexpression, every breath counted. The calm before the storm had ended. The stage was set, the players in position, and the first move in a high-stakes game of television chess had been made. The audience, the crew, and Jimmy himself were all about to witness a series of events that would shock millions, dominate headlines, and be dissected endlessly across social media. And while the first chapter had set the scene, the next moments would escalate beyond what anyone could have imagined. The doors opened, and Meghan Markle stepped onto the stage with the poise and confidence of someone who had spent years under the unblinking eyes of cameras, paparazzi, and royal protocols. Every step was deliberate, every motion precise, every glance intentional. But beneath that seemingly perfect exterior lay an unpredictability that could unsettle even the most seasoned hosts. Jimmy Fallon, standing center stage, greeted her with his characteristic grin and outstretched hand, unaware that the night he had meticulously rehearsed was about to take an unexpected turn. The audience erupted into applause, some cheering, some clapping politely, but all curious to see what would unfold. Live television thrives on energy, on spontaneity, and the electric charge of anticipation. And tonight, that energy was palpable in the air. Cameras clicked, lenses adjusted, and every crew member held their breath, sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. It wasn't just another celebrity appearance. It was a collision of two forces. Jimmy Fallon, the affable, quick-witted host, and Meghan Markle, a global icon with a reputation for commanding attention. From the first handshake, there was a subtle tension, an almost imperceptible shift in dynamics. Jimmy's friendly greeting was met with a polite nod, a soft smile that seemed to conceal a calculating mind. The audience saw only the surface charm, but backstage, the crew picked up on the nuances. The slight tightening of Meghan's jaw, the measured tilt of her head, the way she scanned the room as if assessing every potential advantage. To those who knew her history, it was clear that she had a plan, a purpose, and a keen awareness of the impact she could wield in that moment. Jimmy, seasoned as he was, felt a ripple of unease. He had interviewed countless celebrities, navigated awkward moments, and improvised through countless live mishaps. But something about this interaction was different. Meghan's presence carried authority, a quiet command that made him momentarily pause. He smiled, laughed lightly, and attempted to diffuse the tension with a few opening remarks. But her response was measured, calculated, and slightly detached. It wasn't unfriendly, it was strategic. As they settled into their positions for the interview, the subtle power dynamics became even more apparent. Fallon's role as host traditionally involves leading the conversation, eliciting laughter, and creating an environment where the guest shines while maintaining his own presence. But Meghan's demeanor suggested a different approach. She was not merely a guest. She was a figure accustomed to shaping the narrative, to subtly steering the conversation, and, as it would soon become clear, to asserting control in ways few anticipated. The audience, sensing the slight tension but unaware of the underlying dynamics, continued to clap and cheer, their energy filling the studio. Some leaned forward, intrigued by the poised, elegant figure before them. Others whispered quietly, speculating on the nature of the interaction, trying to read expressions and interpret body language. Live television thrives on this interplay between performer and observer, where every micro-expression, every subtle pause, can be magnified and dissected by millions watching at home. And then came the first subtle sign that this was not going to be a routine appearance. Meghan's gaze lingered on Jimmy longer than necessary, her posture impeccable yet commanding. She adjusted her hair, shifted slightly, and delivered her opening words with a calm authority that immediately altered the tone of the room. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like simple confidence. But to those attuned to the nuances of high-profile appearances, it was a signal. This was a woman who understood the stage, the audience, and the host, and she intended to leave her mark. Jimmy, maintaining his composure, responded with charm, humor, and a few carefully placed jokes. He attempted to establish the familiar rhythm of his interviews, creating space for laughter and ease. But Meghan's responses, while polite and articulate, subtly challenged that rhythm. Her timing, her choice of words, and her pauses suggested she was in control of the interaction, and Jimmy, for the first time in the evening, found himself navigating unfamiliar territory. The balance of power had shifted, and he sensed that the audience, while captivated, was about to witness a dynamic far more charged than they had anticipated. Backstage, the crew exchanged anxious glances. Camera operators adjusted angles, producers whispered into headsets, and security personnel subtly observed, all aware that live television can be unpredictable, especially when two strong personalities collide. The stage was a crucible, and the energy was thick with anticipation. Even the band, usually focused on cues and transitions, seemed attuned to the tension, pausing momentarily as if sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. And then it happened. The moment that would be replayed endlessly across social media, dissected by commentators, and analyzed by millions. Meghan Markle, with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention, made her request. She asked Jimmy Fallon to curtsy to her. On live television, no prior arrangement, no script, no precedent, just a direct, unequivocal demand. The effect was instantaneous. The audience, sensing the unexpected, leaned forward in their seats, a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and amusement washing over them. Jimmy's smile faltered, and for the first time, the practiced host was momentarily at a loss. Backstage, the crew froze, unsure how to respond. Security exchanged subtle glances, producers whispered urgently into headsets, and the camera operators adjusted frantically, capturing every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion. This was not a comedic bit, nor was it a rehearsed skit. This was a genuine, unscripted challenge that placed Fallon at the center of an extraordinary situation. Every second stretched, every pause magnified, and the weight of the moment settled heavily on the stage. Fallon's internal dialogue raced. Could he comply without undermining his authority? Could he refuse without causing offense? Could he navigate this high-stakes scenario while maintaining the integrity of his show and the expectations of millions watching at home? The audience, though unaware of the backstage turmoil, felt the tension. Some assumed it was a joke, others realized it was serious, and all were captivated. In that split second, the dynamics of power, perception, and control were laid bare before the entire nation. Fallon, known for his humor and quick thinking, had to improvise in a situation that defied precedent. Meghan, poised and controlled, had shifted the entire narrative in her favor, demonstrating an acute awareness of how public moments can be manipulated, interpreted, and amplified. The scene set the stage for what would become a defining television moment, one that blended humor, tension, and high drama in ways few could have anticipated. Every movement, every word, every glance carried weight, and the audience, along with millions watching at home, was about to witness an interaction that would be talked about for years to come. As Meghan's request lingered in the air, Fallon realized that this was not just another interview. This was a test of character, a high-stakes negotiation, and a live experiment in power dynamics played out before a global audience. The calm of the evening had shattered, replaced by a charged energy that would drive every subsequent moment. The question on everyone's mind, Jimmy Fallon's, the crew's, and the audience's, was simple yet terrifying. What would he do next? And as the cameras rolled, as the lights blazed, and as the audience waited in rapt attention, one truth became clear. This night would not unfold according to plan. Every expectation had been upended, and the story was only beginning. The moment hung in the air like a charged lightning bolt. Meghan Markle had made her request. She wanted Jimmy Fallon to curtsy. On live television, the words seemed almost surreal, echoing in the studio as if the walls themselves were absorbing the shock. Fallon, whose career had been built on humor, charm, and the ability to gracefully navigate unpredictable situations, froze for a fraction of a second, a blink that felt like an eternity. The audience, sensing the weight of the moment but uncertain whether it was a joke, leaned forward in unison. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion, every micro-expression, every hint of hesitation. It was not the type of scenario Jimmy had prepared for. Over the years, he had hosted actors, musicians, and even politicians. He had improvised through awkward gaffes, unpredictable guests, and chaotic sketches. But a demand to perform a gesture steeped in centuries of ceremonial tradition, on a stage where hierarchy was informal, irreverence celebrated, and laughter expected, was unprecedented. This was not part of the script. It was not a bit. This was a bold challenge thrown into the center of the spotlight, and it required an immediate decision: comply, refuse, or cleverly navigate the situation without losing control. Fallon's mind raced. A curtsy is not just a movement, it's a symbol. It's a gesture of deference, a public acknowledgement of status. In the United States, late-night television thrives on equal footing between host and guest. Jokes, playful teasing, and satire often invert social hierarchies for comedic effect. For Fallon to curtsy on a live broadcast would be a dramatic reversal, one that could be perceived as submission or embarrassment. Yet refusing outright risked offending a globally recognized figure and inviting a wave of criticism, particularly in today's hyper-vigilant media landscape. The studio seemed to hold its breath. The band paused mid-note, the audience murmured softly, and even the lights seemed to dim slightly, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. The production crew, experienced in managing chaos, exchanged rapid-fire glances. They had contingency plans for technical failures, controversial statements, and minor celebrity outbursts, but nothing for a live curtsy request from a former royal. Security adjusted subtly, staying close but discreet, recognizing the potential for escalation. Jimmy tried to mask his internal tension with a laugh, a reflexive human attempt to normalize the absurdity. "A curtsy?" he asked, his tone a mix of disbelief and humor. The words sounded casual, but the underlying question was more serious. Was she serious? Meghan's smile didn't waver. It was polite, confident, and unwavering, a quiet assertion of authority. She repeated the request, not aggressively, not demandingly, but with the assuredness of someone accustomed to others recognizing their expectations. The clarity of her intent made it impossible for Fallon to misinterpret the moment. He glanced toward the crew, searching for a silent signal, a hint of what to do next. But every pair of eyes told the same story. This was a live decision, and the responsibility rested squarely on his shoulders. Fallon's training, instinct, and experience now collided with a scenario that required delicate navigation. One wrong move could instantly become a viral moment, dissected by millions across social media platforms, news outlets, and late-night discussions. In that pause, the audience felt the tension in a way words cannot fully describe. The energy shifted from excitement to anticipation to unease. Some audience members assumed it was a comedic setup, a pre-planned stunt designed to create shock value. Others realized it was serious, their curiosity turning into a silent, collective anxiety. Cameras rotated subtly, capturing Fallon's micro-expressions, Meghan's poised presence, and the almost tangible tension radiating from the stage. The demand itself was more than just a physical gesture. It was a test of boundaries, etiquette, and professional composure. Fallon knew that in centuries-old royal traditions, curtsies symbolize respect and acknowledgement of hierarchical status. But on an American late-night talk show, the host typically holds the stage. The guest may dazzle, entertain, and charm, but the host remains the anchor, the mediator, the one controlling the narrative. Meghan's request disrupted that balance, introducing a high-stakes social negotiation into an environment that thrives on lighthearted banter. Backstage, the crew reacted with subtle urgency. Producers whispered into headsets, weighing the risks of intervening versus letting the interaction play out naturally. Camera operators adjusted angles to ensure the moment would be captured perfectly, anticipating the potential for viral footage. Security personnel maintained their presence without intruding, ready to respond to any sudden escalation. Every element of the studio responded, as if the air itself had thickened with tension. Fallon's internal calculations were rapid. Should he attempt humor to deflect the demand? Could he transform the request into a playful joke without compromising authority? What precedent would this set for future interactions with guests, particularly those accustomed to wielding influence and commanding attention? In a split second, he weighed the consequences of compliance versus resistance, the risks to personal reputation, the expectations of the audience, and the unpredictable fallout of live television. He opened his mouth to speak, words forming but unsure which direction to take. The audience leaned in, the camera capturing every nuance, every subtle hesitation. Meghan's eyes were steady, almost serene, exuding confidence that made the request feel natural in her frame of reference, even though to everyone else, it was extraordinary. The tension was electric, a collision of tradition, celebrity, and the unpredictable nature of live performance. In that charged moment, Fallon realized something crucial. This wasn't merely about a curtsy. It was about control, perception, and the subtle dance of power in a space where appearances matter more than reality. One gesture, one movement, one decision could dominate headlines, influence public perception, and define the narrative for years to come. The stakes were higher than any joke, any improvisation, any standard late-night interview scenario. He could feel the weight of millions of viewers, both present and at home, as if the screen itself transmitted the pressure into his mind. Every option, compliance, deflection, refusal, carried consequences that could ripple far beyond the studio walls. And yet, the moment demanded action. Freeze too long, and the tension would become unbearable. Act too quickly, and he might regret it instantly. Then, just as the silence reached its peak, Fallon made a choice, but the consequences of that choice were only beginning to unfold. Meghan's presence, poised and commanding, had already altered the dynamic of the show. The cameras captured not just a reaction, but a story in itself. A story of confrontation, authority, and the unexpected collision of personalities. This was no longer an interview. This was a pivotal moment of live television history, a moment that would be dissected, debated, and replayed for months to come. And as the scene continued to unfold, one truth became apparent. This encounter would not end with a simple gesture or a laugh. The tension, the anticipation, and the shock had only just begun. The studio lights blazed down, reflecting off polished surfaces, bouncing across cameras, and highlighting every detail of the stage. Jimmy Fallon stood there, frozen in a moment that felt like an eternity. Meghan Markle's request to curtsy had landed like a thunderclap, echoing through the studio, reverberating not just across the stage, but through his mind. He had faced unpredictable moments before, yes, but never one that directly challenged the very authority and image he had built over decades. He was a host known for charm, humor, and the ability to turn awkward situations into comedic gold. But this was different. This was high-stakes diplomacy played out live in front of millions. Inside Jimmy's mind, a storm was raging. He was weighing his options, calculating potential consequences with split-second precision. Every choice carried weight. To comply with Meghan's request might be interpreted as submission, a loss of control over his own show, and potentially a damaging headline across social media and the press the next day. To refuse outright risked offending a globally recognized figure with immense public influence, a misstep that could trigger criticism, accusations of disrespect, or worse, a viral narrative painting him as petty or cowardly. To deflect with humor seemed like the safest choice, but even then, the risk of misunderstanding was high. He could feel the audience's energy shifting. Some leaned forward, sensing that something unusual was occurring. Others whispered to their neighbors, uncertain whether this was a joke, a scripted bit, or a genuine moment of tension. Cameras captured every nuance. Jimmy's hesitation, Meghan's calm poise, the subtle tightening of her smile. Backstage, the crew scrambled silently, producing signals, adjusting lenses, and monitoring the unfolding situation. Every movement seemed amplified under the scrutiny of live television. Jimmy's inner monologue raced. This wasn't just about a curtsy. It was about perception, reputation, and control. His brand, carefully cultivated over years of late-night television, depended on his ability to command the stage while remaining approachable, humorous, and likable. A misstep could unravel that carefully balanced image. But beyond personal brand, there was a broader question. How do you navigate authority and etiquette when the rules are ambiguous and the expectations of your guest contradict the norms of your environment? He briefly considered humor as a solution. A witty remark could defuse tension, redirect the audience's attention, and preserve authority without outright confrontation. "I think I left my royal crown backstage," he might say, injecting levity into a situation that had suddenly become surreal. But even as the thought formed, he hesitated. Humor depends on timing, tone, and audience perception, all of which were unstable in this moment. A joke could backfire, turning playful banter into perceived mockery or disrespect. Fallon also knew that any action would be interpreted beyond the studio walls. Millions of viewers would watch, social media would dissect every second, and commentators would frame every gesture according to preconceived narratives. Complying could be spun as deference or weakness. Refusing could be spun as arrogance or insult. Even the act of hesitation could be spun as uncertainty or fear. In this scenario, the stakes were unprecedented. Meanwhile, Meghan remained composed, her poise unshaken. She watched Fallon with calm expectation, conveying confidence that demanded attention yet avoided aggression. Every subtle glance, every slight tilt of her head, reinforced the power dynamic she was establishing. It was a careful balance, assertive without appearing domineering, commanding without creating outright conflict. To the casual observer, it might have seemed polite, almost charming. But to Fallon, seasoned in reading stage presence, it was a strategic move, a test of his response under pressure. Backstage, subtle shifts were happening. Producers whispered into headsets, debating intervention, while security stayed close, anticipating potential escalation. Camera operators adjusted angles to capture the precise emotional beats, understanding that any subtle facial twitch, pause, or shift could become the defining moment of the broadcast. Even the band members, usually absorbed in music cues, seemed to hold their collective breath, attuned to the unfolding tension. Fallon's dilemma was further complicated by the nature of Meghan's public persona. She is a figure known for careful calculation, media savvy, and the ability to shape narratives in ways that resonate globally. Every action she takes is interpreted, analyzed, and amplified. In this light, the Curtsy request was not merely a random whim. It was a deliberate test, a probe of boundaries, and a subtle assertion of influence. For Fallon, responding incorrectly could create a ripple effect that extended far beyond this single live episode. He considered a compromise, a playful gesture, a mock curtsy, or a humorous deflection. But even compromise carried risk. Any sign of flippancy could be interpreted as disrespect. Any excessive humor could backfire, amplifying the sense of tension instead of diffusing it. Fallon had always excelled at improvisation, but improvisation works best when the situation is unpredictable yet within a familiar framework. Tonight, the framework had been disrupted. He was no longer simply hosting a guest. He was navigating a complex interplay of power, public perception, and live audience expectation. As seconds ticked by, the studio seemed to stretch time itself. Fallon's breathing slowed, his mind calculating, his instincts racing. He knew he needed a decision. But the right decision was not obvious. Every option carried consequences. Every gesture, word, where hesitation could dominate headlines. The tension was so thick it was almost tangible, radiating through the stage, the crew, and even the audience. The internal conflict was exhausting. Part of him wanted to comply, to smooth the moment and avoid confrontation. Part of him wanted to refuse outright, to maintain control of his show and uphold his authority. And part of him wanted to improvise, to turn the tension into humor, as he had done countless times before. But this time, the stakes felt higher, more consequential, almost personal. In that split second, Fallon realized a critical truth. This was no ordinary guest interaction. This was a live experiment in negotiation, authority, and public perception. He was not simply entertaining an audience. He was balancing history, etiquette, media scrutiny, and personal reputation. One misstep could alter the narrative, not just for this episode, but for weeks, months, or even years. The audience sensed it, even if subconsciously. The usual rhythm of applause and laughter had been interrupted by a quiet anticipation, a collective leaning forward. People at home would later describe the moment as surreal, impossible to predict, and yet fascinating. They were witnessing more than a talk show. They were witnessing a collision of personalities, expectations, and high-stakes social dynamics, all unfolding in real time. Jimmy's decision was about to define the night, the headlines, and potentially his own legacy in ways he could not yet comprehend. And while he hesitated, Meghan's poised expectation remained, a silent pressure that demanded response without overtly forcing it. The studio, the audience, and the millions watching at home were collectively holding their breath. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted. What began as a routine late-night interview had evolved into a high-stakes moment, charged with tension, uncertainty, and unspoken power dynamics. Jimmy Fallon stood at the center of the stage, poised yet visibly grappling with the unexpected demand. Meghan Markle wanted him to curtsy. Every second felt magnified, every heartbeat echoing through the studio as though the walls themselves were listening. The audience sensed it, leaning forward in collective anticipation, caught between amusement and disbelief. Cameras rotated to capture every subtle movement, every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion that could betray hesitation or intent. Jimmy's opening line had faltered. The humor he usually relied on to navigate awkward situations was difficult to summon under the weight of this unprecedented request. He tried a light-hearted quip, a nervous smile plastered on his face. "A curtsy, huh? That's new for me." The words were meant to diffuse tension, to inject levity, but the effect was nuanced. Meghan's reaction was measured, polite, yet unmistakably firm. She repeated the request in a calm, controlled tone, conveying confidence and expectation without aggression. This was not just about a gesture. It was about control, respect, and the subtle assertion of authority in a situation that defied convention. The exchange that followed became a delicate dance of communication. Fallon's instinct was to maintain the flow of the show, to redirect the conversation, to create humor as a buffer. Meghan's approach was the opposite. She maintained her poise, her timing impeccable, her gaze fixed in a way that made the audience and Fallon acutely aware that she was in command of this interaction. Every pause, every word, every shift of posture carried meaning. The tension was not just visible. It was palpable, like static electricity charging the air. Behind the cameras, the crew reacted instinctively. Producers whispered urgently into their headsets, debating whether to intervene or allow the interaction to play out naturally. Security stayed alert, maintaining a discreet presence near the stage, aware that heightened tension could escalate at any moment. Camera operators adjusted lenses to capture subtle nuances, understanding that these moments often define the narrative in ways scripted segments never can. Every gesture, no matter how small, had the potential to become a headline or a viral clip. Jimmy attempted to regain control with humor, a tool he had wielded expertly throughout his career. "Well," he said, pausing deliberately, "I suppose this is one way to make history on my show." The audience chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh at the remark or remain silent in anticipation. Meghan's response was measured, a quiet acknowledgement of his attempt at levity, yet it reinforced the underlying tension. She smiled politely, leaned slightly forward, and maintained eye contact that suggested calm authority. This was no longer a simple talk show exchange. It was a negotiation of power, a test of social dynamics in real time, and a subtle battle of wills. Fallon's experience had trained him to improvise, to pivot, to manage live interactions with grace. Yet Meghan's composure and assertiveness presented a scenario he had never encountered. Every choice carried implications, every reaction could be interpreted in multiple ways, and the stakes extended beyond the stage, beyond the studio, and into the global public consciousness. The audience, both in the studio and at home, could sense the tension intensifying. Some whispered, some leaned forward, and some held their breath, captivated by the unfolding drama. The energy was no longer lighthearted entertainment. It had become a suspenseful moment, charged with curiosity and speculation. People were trying to read the micro-expressions. Was Fallon about to comply? Would he resist? How would Meghan react? Every possibility seemed simultaneously plausible and shocking. Backstage, subtle maneuvers continued. Stagehands adjusted props, technicians fine-tuned cameras, and producers monitored every nuance of audio and visual feed. The entire team was acutely aware that the situation could escalate at any moment, and their collective vigilance reflected the seriousness of the unprecedented scenario. Security personnel maintained a quiet presence, ready to intervene only if necessary, understanding that the real challenge was not physical but social, emotional, and performative. Fallon's inner conflict deepened. He had always prided himself on maintaining authority while being approachable, funny, and charming. But the Curtsy request disrupted the delicate balance of host-guest dynamics. Compliance risked undermining his position, refusal risked offense, deflection risked misinterpretation. And all of this was happening in a context where millions of viewers were watching, analyzing, and forming opinions in real time. Meghan, by contrast, exhibited the calm precision of someone experienced in navigating public perception. Her demeanor conveyed confidence without arrogance, authority without aggression. Every subtle shift in her posture, every carefully timed word, reinforced her position and heightened the stakes of the interaction. She was asserting influence in a space where hierarchy is fluid, but perception is everything. The tension reached a peak as Fallon attempted a compromise. He made a small, playful gesture, a half-bow that straddled humor and acknowledgement. It was enough to momentarily diffuse the pressure, but not enough to fully satisfy Meghan's expectation. The audience reacted with a mixture of laughter, murmurs, and curiosity, sensing that the exchange was far from over. Cameras captured the subtle interplay of body language, facial expression, and timing, ensuring that every nuance would be preserved for viewers worldwide. This tense exchange was not just a personal interaction. It was a spectacle of social negotiation under pressure. It highlighted the intricacies of live television, the power of presence, and the unpredictability of high-profile celebrity interactions. Fallon's ability to improvise was being tested in real time, while Meghan's strategic composure ensured that the narrative remained partially under her control. And just as the audience began to settle into the rhythm of the conversation, another unexpected element shifted the dynamic yet again. A subtle remark, a fleeting glance, or a quiet movement, details too small for the casual observer, would soon escalate the tension, pushing the interaction into uncharted territory and setting the stage for a moment that no one in the studio could have anticipated. The exchange had begun as a polite, if unusual, request. It had evolved into a delicate battle of wills, a test of composure, and a dramatic moment of high-stakes improvisation. But the story was far from over. Every choice, every subtle action, and every micro-expression from this point forward would ripple outward, influencing perception, headlines, and the narrative for weeks to come. The studio lights seemed brighter now, almost blinding, reflecting off the polished stage as if to emphasize the heightened tension. Jimmy Fallon, normally the master of smooth improvisation and comedic timing, felt an unfamiliar weight pressing down on him. The Curtsy request from Meghan Markle had shifted the entire dynamic of the evening. What began as a seemingly simple, polite exchange had escalated into a moment charged with anticipation, unspoken power, and public scrutiny. Every micro-expression, every subtle shift in posture, now carried the potential to define the narrative of the show and, potentially, his career. Fallon's mind raced as he considered his options. Complying might temporarily ease the tension but risked undermining his authority as host, making him appear subservient on a platform where the host traditionally maintains control. Refusing outright could offend Meghan, sparking criticism or even a public perception that he had been disrespectful to a globally recognized figure. Attempting humor might lighten the mood, but only if delivered perfectly. A misstep could intensify the awkwardness, drawing attention to the power imbalance and creating the very headlines he sought to avoid. The audience, sensing something extraordinary was unfolding, leaned forward in their seats. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mixture of excitement, confusion, and disbelief. Some assumed it was a pre-planned skit, part of the comedic routine Fallon often delivered so effortlessly. Others, watching his hesitation, realized the request was genuine and unprecedented. Cameras pivoted to capture every reaction. The subtle narrowing of Fallon's eyes, the controlled yet poised smile on Meghan's face, and the faint shifting of audience members as they tried to read the scene. Backstage, the crew's tension mirrored that on stage. Producers whispered urgently into their headsets, debating whether to intervene, redirect the conversation, or let the moment unfold naturally. Stagehands froze mid-step, unsure whether to continue props and set adjustments or to simply observe the escalating situation. Security personnel remained discreetly close, fully aware that though no physical threat existed, the emotional and performative stakes were higher than usual. The pressure was palpable, reverberating not just across the stage, but through every corner of the studio. Fallon's internal conflict was reaching its peak. He was acutely aware that the live broadcast amplified every choice. The eyes of millions, both in the studio and at home, were trained on him. Every micro-movement, every flicker of hesitation, every word spoken or unsaid could be replayed endlessly across social media platforms, dissected by commentators, and debated by the public. The stakes were not hypothetical. They were immediate, tangible, and immense. He attempted a joke, hoping to regain control of the narrative. "Well," he said, forcing a chuckle, "I guess this is a news segment, royal etiquette for late night." Who knew? The audience chuckled cautiously, some laughing nervously, others whispering in anticipation. Meghan responded with a subtle, measured smile, not directly laughing but acknowledging the attempt at humor. The dynamic remained delicate. She was not confrontational, yet her presence commanded a quiet authority that forced Fallon to navigate carefully. The subtle tension began to build toward a tipping point. Fallon realized that this interaction was no longer simply an interview. It had become a test of character, composure, and professional judgment. Meghan's calm, deliberate demeanor suggested she had anticipated reactions and potential resistance. She was not merely requesting a gesture. She was probing the boundaries of authority, influence, and respect. The request for a curtsy was both literal and symbolic, a calculated moment designed to observe how Fallon would respond under pressure. Audience perception heightened the stakes. People at home, streaming or watching live, could feel the tension through the screen. Comments and social media posts began to proliferate in real time, speculating on Fallon's reaction and Meghan's intentions. Was this playful banter, a test of etiquette, or an overt assertion of power? Every viewer's interpretation added weight to the moment, transforming a single gesture into a global spectacle. Backstage, subtle maneuvers continued. Camera operators framed Fallon and Meghan in ways that emphasized the psychological tension. Producers whispered strategies, considering whether to steer the conversation or intervene subtly. Even the lighting crew adjusted lights to maintain visual clarity, inadvertently highlighting the heightened drama. Every element of production became part of the unfolding narrative, reinforcing the sense that the tipping point had arrived. Fallon's instincts began to assert themselves. He knew he needed a decisive move. Hesitation beyond this point would be magnified, interpreted as weakness or uncertainty. Yet, the decision had to balance humor, authority, and audience expectation. One false step could become a viral moment, replayed and reinterpreted for weeks, if not years. He considered the curtsy again, weighing it not just as a physical gesture, but as a symbolic concession. Compliance would demonstrate respect, but could also shift the perceived power balance, transforming the show's dynamic in a single instant. Meghan, maintaining her calm, appeared almost serene. Her expression, body language, and subtle movements suggested that she anticipated his deliberation and perhaps even hoped for it. Her presence amplified the tension. Every second of silence, every pause, added layers of meaning to the moment. She was commanding attention not through aggression but through poise, making the audience and Fallon alike acutely aware of the psychological dynamics at play. Then, the subtle escalation occurred. Fallon's slight hesitation, combined with a carefully measured response, signaled the audience that a real decision was imminent. The room seemed to contract, as if the walls themselves were drawing closer to emphasize the gravity of the moment. The cameras captured every nuance, every flicker of emotion, and every micro-movement. The energy in the studio became almost unbearable, a charged mix of anticipation, suspense, and curiosity. At that tipping point, Fallon realized the interaction had transcended conventional talk show boundaries. It was no longer just an interview. It was a live demonstration of social negotiation, authority, and performative control. Meghan's curtsy request had initiated a chain reaction, compelling Fallon to navigate the delicate balance between compliance, deflection, and assertion of his own professional presence. Every choice from here would reverberate far beyond the studio walls. And then, as the cameras rolled and the audience leaned forward, Fallon made a decisive move. But the consequence of that move would propel the night into an unforgettable, headline-grabbing spectacle, the kind that reshapes public perception and defines moments in late-night television history. The energy in the studio had reached a fever pitch. What began as a routine late-night interview had now transformed into a suspenseful, high-stakes encounter. Jimmy Fallon stood center stage, every muscle subtly tensed, fully aware that millions of eyes were on him. Meghan Markle, composed and deliberate, had not shifted an inch, her gaze steady, her poise unwavering. The audience sensed the gravity of the moment. Some leaned forward in anticipation, others whispered to neighbors, unsure if they were witnessing humor, tension, or something far more significant. Cameras captured every micro-expression, ensuring that each subtle reaction would later be replayed and dissected endlessly across social media and news platforms. Fallon's internal dialogue raced. His mind ran through every potential scenario, a compliant curtsy, a humorous deflection, or a firm refusal. Each option carried weighty consequences. Compliance risked undermining his authority as host, possibly making him appear subservient to a guest. Humor might lighten the tension but could also backfire, suggesting flippancy in the face of a direct request. Refusal outright risked offending Meghan, potentially drawing criticism and complicating the narrative in a media environment that thrives on viral moments. He decided to test the waters with a playful response. Leaning slightly forward, he smiled, attempting humor to diffuse the charged tension. "I guess we're entering uncharted territory tonight," he said, his tone balancing amusement with caution. The audience chuckled nervously, caught between laughter and suspense. Meghan's reaction, subtle but telling, was a quiet, poised acknowledgement. She did not laugh outright, nor did she display irritation. Instead, her calm demeanor reinforced her authority, signaling that this was no ordinary late-night exchange. The subtle battle of wills became more apparent. Every pause, every glance, every word choice was now laden with meaning. Fallon knew that even a slight misstep could be magnified, becoming a viral moment replayed in countless clips and memes. The tension extended beyond the stage, into the minds of viewers watching at home, where perception and interpretation often outweigh reality. A single gesture could define the narrative for days, or even weeks. Backstage, the crew reacted instinctively. Producers whispered into headsets, debating how, or if, to intervene. Camera operators adjusted angles to ensure full coverage of the pivotal interaction. Security remained subtly alert, aware that while no physical threat existed, the social and emotional stakes were extraordinarily high. Every team member understood that live television had become a crucible for an unprecedented clash of personalities. Fallon attempted a compromise, a gesture that walked the fine line between acknowledgement and humor. He made a slight, exaggerated bow, not a full curtsy, but enough to signal playful recognition of the request. The audience responded with a mixture of laughter, gasps, and murmurs, unsure if it was comedic, respectful, or awkward. Meghan's subtle smile indicated measured approval, yet she remained unwavering in her composure. This small, calculated interaction shifted the tension subtly, but significantly. Fallon had acknowledged the request without fully yielding, maintaining his professional presence while respecting her position. The audience's reactions were telling. Some laughed at the absurdity, some leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. Cameras captured the interplay of body language, timing, and micro-expressions. Social media buzzed even during the live broadcast, as viewers shared their interpretations, debated intentions, and speculated on the motivations behind the unusual exchange. The world was witnessing more than an interview. It was witnessing a live performance of power, authority, and negotiation in real time. The showdown reached a new intensity when Meghan leaned forward slightly, her posture deliberate. Her gaze locked with Fallon's, and she delivered a line that was calm but pointed, subtly reaffirming her expectations without aggression. The words were measured, carefully chosen, and underscored the psychological stakes. This was about presence, control, and the subtle dynamics of recognition and respect. Fallon absorbed the moment, realizing that a response was unavoidable. Hesitation had already been magnified. Inaction was no longer a viable option. Fallon's choice was critical. He could pivot entirely to humor, risking misinterpretation. He could comply fully, risking perceived submission, or he